Rod Fleming, the Philippines here. Now this is the third part in the Civilisation series, and it will take us a while till we get to the point where the first, keystones are laid, but never mind. We talked about Australopithecus africanus in the last video, because he was one of the first primates that stood up. He wasn't the first, but he was one of the first. And even Australopithecus, his pelvis was not really designed for, or adapted rather, for running, and at best he was a slow walker, an awkward walker, but he could walk. He did walk, that's what he got about. Australopithecus africanus was discovered 1947, I believe. About 40 years later, another older ape was discovered called afarensis, Australopithecus afarensis. And again, some people will now say there's a big argument about this. Afarensis is the one you should take as the start. Well, I'm not a paleontologist, so I have to look at how I can best tell the story of what happened. And for that purpose, Africanus is better. And if you remember, we had a nice picture of a rather cute Africanus. It was a reconstitution, obviously. And I've got another picture of him here, so I'll just put him up on the screen for a while for you to look at. Now, the first thing to look at and first thing to be aware of when you're looking at this is just ahead. This was an animal that was roundly, male's about 4 foot tall, female's a little bit shorter. But look at the teeth. His dentition was really human. And that's the first time. Afarensis has really much more ape-like dentition. Much more like what you'd find in a chimpanzee or something. He has really marked, what they're called pegged lateral incisors, big canine teeth. Obviously it's not a canine, but never mind, that's what they're called. And these are for ripping and for grabbing, right? Now, if you look at Africanus, he doesn't have that. His teeth are much more like human teeth. They're much more even and they're much smaller. Now, why has that happened? And paleontologists have been able to reconstruct a fair bit of what they think Africanus' diet was. Certainly he ate roots and plants, green vegetables, green leaves. He still had the capacity to digest cellulose, which is very hard for humans. But something else was also in the diet, and that was he was eating meat, but he wasn't, they don't think he was hunting and killing meat. He was living on finds. He was scavenging, right? So he was picking up dead animals or bits of dead animals and eating those. Now, that sounds pretty gross, and it is, but it's practical. What it allows you to do is to use your teeth less, because a piece of meat that has been sitting for a while basically tenderizes. That's why, when you get your nice, lovely big steak, and you like your steak bloody, like all of us, and you can't get that in the Philippines, but never mind. The reason it's so tender, and it tastes just right, it's just so toothsome, is because it's been hanging for 2 weeks. It's already started to decompose, and the chemicals in the cell system which go into action after death have already started to break down or denature the protein, right? So that it's actually easier, it's more tender and easy to eat. Your body can access this protein more easily because it's already partially digested, you see? Foraging and picking up, you can hear the rain, I don't know if you can hear the rain, but that's the rain coming on strong again. Foraging and picking up dead meat, partially decomposed, scavenging, has the same effect. The meat that you're eating is already partially denatured, so you don't need the big fangs to rip it apart. It's going to eat quite easily. But there's a problem. And that problem is that, well, picking up dead bodies to eat, it's not that nice. And there is a chance of you contracting some diseases. We're not quite sure when humans started to cook But what you have to understand is that cooking has the same effect as leaving things to rot for a while, right? In that meat to rot for a while, in that it denatures the protein and makes it easier to chew up and to absorb into your body. But it has another effect. It cleans it. It kills anything in it that might kill you. And although our Australopithecine ancestors were certainly not biochemists, they probably discovered fairly soon that if you heated some of this meat, then it was actually safer to eat. It killed any bad tastes. It made it more pleasant, and it made it safer. And I mention this because cooking is taken as being one of the most important steps after standing up that humans ever took. That's, on our route to being where we are now. These are the two really big milestones, which are obvious. One being standing up and walking around, and the other one being cooking our food. Why is that so important, and why did other animals not do it? Well, human brains are massively, massively energy hungry. They use a great deal of energy just to keep the brain running. And growing them takes, a huge amount. Humans, I've said this before, humans take roughly 20 years to reach, a human male, to reach a maximum weight of, say, 200, just for roughness, 200 pounds, 100 kilos or so, 80 kilos. Human development, right, of the human body is deliberately slowed. It's held in check in order to give time to grow the brain, because the brain takes so long and so much effort and energy to grow. Now, if you require all that energy, then you need to find a source for it. And the fact is that meat is the source. Meat represents, consider the chain. You've got grass, just for one. There's plenty of ways this could happen. But you've got grass, right? And an animal eats the grass and turns it into beef, say, or lamb or mutton or whatever. And then you kill that animal and eat its meat. So what you're actually doing is you're capitalizing on that animal's ability to process cellulose-based plants into a protein-based meat that you can use, and which is very, very rich in energy, and other things too, including the fat-soluble vitamins, which we need. The cooking pre-digests your food. It's easier to digest, so you don't need to have the kind of sophisticated stomach that pre-hominids would have had in order to cope with the food they were eating. When you start cooking it, it gets a lot easier. It's much easier to digest, So cooking became very important because it allowed us to consume more energy at less cost in terms of energy and divert that to growing big brains, right? And that's really critical. That's any decent source that I've read, these are the two that they point out. When you stood up and when you started to cook your food, these are really important. Now, cooking food goes on from just the simple idea of nourishment. Just before we go there, remember that you have, all of you sitting watching here, unless you've had them removed surgically as I did, will have a thing called an appendix, which is a tiny little bit that hangs from your intestine, a little stub about the size of my pinky here, a bit smaller. And actually that is the remnants of an ancient stomach, right? An ancient processing system that was once part of human bodies, and the function of that was to process cellulose, to ferment it inside the body and release the sugars and then use it in the same way as cows do. And we didn't ever have 4 stomachs like a cow does, but we had an extra stomach for doing this. And when we started cooking food and eating denatured proteins and eating meat particularly, bingo. And humans find it very hard to digest raw meat, you see. It's a problem for humans. So that's why they were picking up the the already partially denatured scavenging finds, and then cooking. Brilliant. Not only can you access the energy, it's much easier to consume. It's consuming proteins. It takes about one third of the calorific value of a quantity of protein to actually digest it once it's cooked. And if it's uncooked, it takes an awful lot more. So you're not really getting all the benefit from it. So the potential benefit in energy terms from cooked meats is huge. And by the way, to all the vegans out there, humans are not meant to be vegan. Humans are not meant to be vegetarian. We're omnivores. And please stop pushing your crap on the rest of the planet. Anyway, this is one of these things that's like a chain reaction, because the bigger the brains got, the better we got at finding ways to feed ourselves to make bigger brains, right? And that's basically what we did. But cooking has had another really major issue, influence on human culture, which every culture that I'm aware of, every single one, has adopted, and that is table culture. Humans sit down together to eat, right? And food becomes the center of the social unit when everybody comes together to eat. And they might be completely separate for the rest of the day, but when they come together to eat, there you go. They sit down together to eat and they talk, right? Now, when humans actually developed what we might call a sophisticated language, it's not very clear. But we know that modern humans, precursors to modern humans rather, had been doing it. So we can say that language goes back a long way, certainly 1 million years, maybe more. Humans have a very sophisticated system of vocal cords, right? That's what allows you to sing and all that stuff. But you also have a thing which very rare is you've got a thing called a dropped larynx. You can't really see because I'm fat, but the larynx, the voice box here, Adam's apple as it's called, is actually quite far down. There, I've got my finger on it, right? Now, if I bring my finger up and touch where the back of my tongue is, it's here. So you can see there's probably, what's that, 2.5 inches? That's called a dropped larynx, and that allows a tremendously improved control over the sounds that the voice makes, because it's a resonating chamber. It creates a resonating chamber at the back of your throat. A human can actually, and this has happened, this is one of the problems that you often have in accidents where somebody's unconscious, is they actually choke on their own tongues. They're lying on their back, it falls down into the space behind, and it blocks the airway. And if you do first aid, you will know that the very first thing you do when you find someone in a situation like that is to check and clear their airways, to get your finger in and pull the tongue forward so that they don't choke to death on it. And this is not something most animals have to worry about, because they don't have a space there. The tongue doesn't have anywhere to go. So we have now a situation where we have an animal that is growing its brain, right? And it's coming together to eat cooked food, because they're obviously not all sitting around with their one little pot, and I'm doing mine and you're doing yours. No, they were doing it communally, they were doing it together. And we have we have trace evidence of this, of cooked meals. And they were talking. So now you've got culture, right? Now you've got culture. And culture is actually, that's where the civilization comes from. People are starting to talk about things. They're starting to say, well, what about we go and try that lake that we went to last year? You think that would be a good idea? I know, yeah, okay. And the woman might go, oh, God. I've just had a baby, I've got to transport the baby all the way up there, And she might say, well, look, tell you what, boys, you go. and we'll stay here because we've got quite a good camp here and it's quite secure. It's quite safe, and there's plenty of foraging food around here. Why don't you go up the lake and get some fish, bring it back? And that's what happens. That's what humans do. They talk about things, they start to make plans, they start to develop ideas, and it all happens because of this process, the fact that they, not only are they a walking animal, they're a talking animal, and they talk, they have big brains, they sit down together to eat, and they commune when they eat. Now, where that gets us is the idea that you have two groups, because you've got the women who are sitting around saying, I've got 3 kids here and you want me to trail all the way up to that bloody lake? I don't think so. I'm going to stay here. Off you go, chum. You take your pals and go and get some fish. It's just fine. That's absolutely fine. That is the sensible thing for them to do, because moving children around is dangerous. They could have an accident or they could become the prey of a predator. There is an Australopithecus, I think it's an Afarensis, could be an Africanus, can't remember. I think it's an Africanus actually, called the tongue child, which is a juvenile, they think about 2 to 3 years old. And they know from the marks on the skull that it had its eyes ripped out by an eagle. Nasty way to go. But this would have been a daily concern for the mothers. It was like they don't want to go to places that are dangerous. They found a nice cave or a sheltered place in the woods or something, and it's like, no, we're safe here. You lads go and do the biz, right? So what that gets you to is the next really important step that you have to be aware of, which is that humans are evolved to live in 2 groups. We are evolved to live in 2 separate and discrete groups, and these groups are what Don Kulik calls the men and not men group, but which in this context it's probably easier to call them the home and away group. Now the home group is the women and the children, and any males who maybe they're too old, maybe they've been injured, or for some other reason aren't taking part in the male hunt, right? So that's your home group, and this is really important. And then you've got your away group, and that consists of the fit men and the adolescent boys who are, coming up to the point at which they will also be men. So these tend, in human cultures, to be quite separate. They're not together. They live separate lives. But what brings them together, what actually causes them to be one group, is this business of eating together. Because what will happen is at the end of the day or at the end of the hunt or whatever, they all come together and they sit and they eat, right? And then the next day off they go and do their thing. So I'm going to stop this one now and do another one about this business of the 2 groups, because this is really, really important.